Now, let's get to it. There are a lot of issues that I like to find out for myself and on behalf of Nigerians get some clarity, because what exactly is happening on this program? Some of us don't like to discuss those figures because some of us are not mathematically or economically savvy. We want to know the bottom line. But tonight I'm being joined by the Director General of the Budget Office, Mr. Ben Akabueze, who joins us virtually. Thank you so much, Mr. Akabueze, for your time tonight. Give us a sense, first and foremost, for what we heard the Minister of Finance say, now that there's NNPC, whom you made reference that funding the fuel subsidy. Now, they probably will not even be remitting any money into the TSA any longer. Subsidy payment, the federal government has to source it. So where are you going to get the money to source for the subsidy, which we imagine will end in December this year, isn't it?
Well, thank you, Sean. It's my pleasure to be here. First, let me clarify that as far as NNPC is concerned, the price at which petrol is sold to the public is a matter of government policy. And so for NNPC, their role simply has been as an agent of the Federation to import these products to meet the needs of the economy. And what they have done up until now, which is why they refer to it as a cost under recovery rather than a subsidy. But bottom line, it's tantamount to subsidy. What NNPC does, NNPC receives revenues on behalf of the Federation, whose oil assets it manages. And what they have been doing is, when they receive these funds, whatever costs they incur in bringing the products into the country, less the price at which, the approved price at which they sell it, which is the subsidy amount, they recover upfront from the revenues before they remit the revenues into the Federation account. And that's why when you look at our budget, you will not see subsidy as an expenditure item because it's an upfront deduction from revenues. You see it in the fiscal framework, which is approved by the National Assembly. And that's the authorization that NNPC has to be able to deduct those funds upfront. Now, what is going to change? Simply, all that's going to change. NNPC is still going to continue to, manage those oil assets, receive the revenues. It's a 100% owned company by government. But instead of on a monthly basis coming to the Federation account, to Federation allocation committee to account for what it has received, what it has spent, and what is NNPC now will prepare its books, being a company registered under the Companies and Allied Matters Act, and declare its profit. And out of those profits, it will pay dividends to the Federation. Now, as the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning explained earlier today, the pattern and the timing of the payment of those dividends is a matter that is still currently under discussion. But it will be such that, because governments, the states and the local government, the federal government has to run from month to month. So there has to be an arrangement where those dividends don't wait for the end of a full year to be paid. And there is a precedent. If you take the NLNG, for instance, the NLNG pays dividends on a quarterly basis. So, whether it's quarterly or monthly or whatever frequency is agreed, those dividends will be paid. Now, the other part of the discussion is to whether or not NNPC should pay the dividends in gross and then in turn, the government pays, them for whatever shortfall they incur in, procuring the products, or whether the NNPC would still be authorized to recover the cost of, those shortfalls before, remitting the dividends due to the government. And as the Honorable Minister said earlier today, the latter option seems likely to be the way to, that we will go. So the subsidy payments have never been NNPC's responsibility in terms of who bears the cost. They've always been borne by the Federation, the federal, state, and local governments. And NNPC has simply acted as an agent of the Federation.
So, because this is an aside from the major issue I'd like to discuss with you tonight. So, clarify quickly, because I asked, the subsidy regime will end by December this year. Is that right?
No. At the beginning of this year, the government announced an 18-month extension in the, subsidy regime. So, 18 months from the beginning of this year is mid next year, June next year.
Okay. Now, so we're still going to be bearing that cost till next year. Give us, and the question is, any government that comes into power after May next year, May 29 next year, we still have to face that burden out of the scarce resource that Nigeria is facing now. But the question is that also clarify for us, because you are in the middle or in the forefront of cooking the budget. The story about NNPC not remitting, or that hasn't been remitting before this new regime into the TSA, into the Federation account for a while now. What is the true picture of things? Can you clarify for Nigerians?
Well, that is true. The Honourable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning confirmed that earlier today. What has been happening is essentially, as I said, NNPC receives revenues on behalf of the government. And then, they import these products, in particular petrol, which is the only product that is still subsidized. And because of the subsidy element in it, no private importers stay away from it because they have no assurance about to recover their money. It must be clarified that there is no embargo, there's no restriction on anybody importing petrol. The reason why NNPC is the only one importing petrol is because while NNPC has recourse to the Federation account to be able to recover whatever losses it suffers on importation of petrol, the private companies don't have that recourse, and so they've stayed away from importing petrol. So what has happened is up until this moment, this year, the total revenues NNPC has collected on behalf of the Federation from oil has gone into importing the products, because two things have happened. One, exacerbated by the Russia-Ukraine war, international oil prices have risen significantly, and the price of crude is the most important determinant of the price of the refined product. So whichever direction the price of crude goes, in that direction the price of refined products will go. So prices of refined products have risen sharply, coupled with constrained supply, which has further added pressure to upward pressure on prices. In our own particular case, we are suffering what you might call a double whammy situation, because while we are suffering the impact of the rapid rise in energy costs caused by worsened by the Russia-Ukraine war, because even before that, prices were already relatively high. But in our own case, on top of that, we have had a significant reduction in oil production volumes. In the first 4 months of this year, oil production has averaged 1.3 million barrels per day. Our initial 2022 budget was based on a production of 1.86 million barrels per day. Earlier in the year, when production looked like it was challenged, we revised that down to 1.6. But even at the lower target of 1.6, we're still 300,000 barrels short on a daily basis. That's a lot of money, revenues that are consequently been lost. And NNPC is the decline in production is principally caused by the massive crude oil theft and the vandalization of oil pipelines and infrastructure, production infrastructure in the Niger Delta. And so what we have now is at a time when all other major oil producing economies are suffering high inflation, but then also having a boom in terms of their revenues. We have a double whammy. We are experiencing what they call the tensions of a all the non-oil economies that's experiencing significant inflationary tensions on account of high energy. But the oil economies are offsetting that by the bumper revenues that they are getting. But in our own case, we are experiencing the tensions of a non-oil economy in an oil economy because of...
Mr. Akabueze, because I understand that you don't have so much time with us tonight because of some other engagement, and like a few questions in fact, I have not delved into some of the questions that I planned for the conversation with you, but this is very critical for my viewers tonight, and it's a fact that what assurances can we get from the federal government, speaking through you tonight, that there might not be any impact on the price of fuel, especially petrol? Would there be any jack in the price of fuel?
You are asking me a question that is above my pay grade.
I don't think so. You've analyzed some of these indices. You said we are being whammed in a double manner. This is a double whammy, you called it. Yeah, so the question is, a lot of Nigerians, you have the facts, you have the figures, and you plan the books.
I've given you the facts, I don't make the policy decision.
Yeah, but I mean, you are very strong in some of these projections. Could it possibly affect the price of fuel? The situation we have found ourselves, when other countries of the world are enjoying the impact of the situation in Ukraine, Nigeria is not enjoying it. So could it affect the cost, the price of fuel?
I don't know what the answer to that question is, because it's not my decision.
Okay, let's move on to other issues so that we don't flog a dead horse. Now, how are you funding the deficit? We understand that the deficits are shot to the budget are shot beyond 3 trillion naira. Given that you cannot borrow, you cannot do majorly foreign borrowings because of the interest rate and all of that. So how are you funding the deficit?
Well, the deficit is being funded principally, from borrowings, and mostly domestic borrowings at this point in time. Of course, we have access to some foreign, borrowings from multilateral and bilateral sources. The source of foreign borrowing that is clearly challenged at this point in time is accessing the international capital markets. And at this point in time, I don't believe that the DMO has any plans to do so for now.
So it does look like double trouble, perhaps double jeopardy for the nation. We're already crowded now in our borrowing, and the burden is very heavy now. So the question is, if you're looking towards the domestic borrowing, the question is going to be the impact on local business. And the question will be, are you not going to crowd out local business people if you're looking into domestic borrowing, the impact on domestic businesses?
Well, the reality is those bonds are issued domestically, issued in the domestic market. It doesn't mean that only domestic investors, buy into the bonds. That's one thing to note. So you still have some, external flows into the market to buy bonds. But beyond that, for now, it does appear that the domestic market has the absorptive capacity. And if you look at the balance sheets of the banks, it's not like it's not like there's a pressure coming from the private sector on their balance sheets for funding.
Now,
a lot of the banks seem
quickly,
very liquid.
Before. All right. So that's worrisome also. When you talked about the impact of oil theft and the reason why we are not able to produce, other nations are cashing in and cashing out on the situation in Ukraine. Now, what are you doing to ensure that you change that scenario that is not allowing us to be able to get as much from the situation that we have found ourselves?
Well, it's a security situation, and it's not one that the most that we can do on our own part is to allocate as much resources as we can to the security agencies to be able to deal with that situation. But beyond that, it's a job for the security agencies. And basically, so, that's NNPC.
Are they giving you, because you need to make projections? By now, I think you'll be planning for the 2023 budget. Are they telling you anything different from what you have heard? Whether anything will change as far as the security? Why has there been an increase in the oil theft? Some people must be benefiting from this. Who are these people? What do we know? What can we tell Nigerians? There must be some level of clarity and information, transparency to the Nigerian people. If there is oil theft and Nigeria is groaning in all of this revenue problem, what do we know? What can you tell us?
Well, Sean, what we know is that there is oil theft of what people have classified as industrial scale. And therefore, if it is of such a scale, then it must be visible. Okay, therefore, some of that, of course, is, what people use to operate what they call the illegal refineries. But there's a sense that that is only a small part of the capacity of those refineries. They can't basically handle all of the quantum of oil that is being stolen on a daily basis, and therefore, without a doubt, this is something that is bigger than the activities of the oil refineries. But I don't have the answers. I sit in my office here in Abuja, and not there in the production, fields. But as I said, it's a job. It's a job for the security agencies to basically secure our oil production.
The picture looks glooming, because now, if we need money, if there's any time Nigeria needs money, it is now to fix this economy, because things are not, especially the price of commodity is not looking good at all. And that's perhaps where I would like us to anchor on this conversation, and quickly too. The CBN has come out to say part of the problem that it is facing on its own side in fixing the challenges of the economy is outside of its own powers, and that's outside of the powers of the CBN. What are you doing to bring down the inflation in the country on that, on the fiscal side now?
Well, essentially, the inflation in Nigeria comes from two sources. You have the structural issues, okay? And then, of course, you have the money supply issues. Central bank's action in moving interest rates and all of can only affect the money supply side of this. But on the fiscal side, we're tackling matters like the challenge of infrastructure that add to the cost of doing business. Of course, the government has to deal with the challenge of security as well, because food inflation is a major contributor to the inflation, and the insecurity in the agricultural, major agricultural belt, is contributing to that. So that has to be, addressed. Other challenges like, simply managing the activities of whether it's regulatory agencies that are within the ambit of government and so on, and their impact on the cost of doing business and all of that. Those things we have to deal with so that we can bring down the cost of that's what we're doing on the fiscal side.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Ben Akabueze, the Director General of the Budget Office. Thank you so much indeed for some of the clarity and perspective that you are giving to us on the state of the economy. Thank you so much indeed. Let me allow you go attend to some of the business, and thank you for creating the time.
Thank you, Sean. It's my pleasure.
Appreciate it.